Chairman, you can start the meeting, thank you. You can start the meeting now.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's extraordinary meeting of full council. Welcome also to those members of the press and public who are joining us via the live stream. Before we begin, please can I take this opportunity to remind member and officer colleagues to turn their mobile telephones to silent and ensure that when addressing the meeting, they speak directly into the microphones, ensuring that the red light is on. Moving to agenda item 1, can I please ask member services to report any apologies for absence?
Thank you. Yes, we've had apologies from councillors Booth, Carney, Connor, Miss French, Gerstner, Gowler, Hicks, Mrs Laws, Murphy and Purser. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I should add that councillors Roy and Patrick are running slightly late due to road closure. They will be here shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2 is to receive any declarations of interest under the local code of conduct or any interest under the code of conduct on planning matters in respect of any items to be discussed at this meeting. If you have anything to declare, please can you raise your hand? No hands are raised, thank you. Before we move to the substantive item of business on today's agenda, it is with sadness that I must announce the passing of Bernard Keane. Bernard was a Fenland District Councillor for March East from May 1999 until May 2015. During that time, he served as chairman from 2007 to 2009 and also contributed to the work of various committees, including licensing, planning and overview and scrutiny. He was also a founding member of the Golden Age team. I'd like to offer the council's sincere condolences to Bernard's friends and loved ones at this very sad time and ask that you join me in a minute's silence to commemorate his life. If you're able to stand, please do so. Thank you very much. I have just been informed that the funeral will be on the 31st of March. Agenda item 3, local government reorganisation and draft proposals. The report in relation to local government reorganisation can be found at pages 3 to 8 of the agenda pack. In order to ensure we can have a full debate on this important item, I propose that we modify the standing orders to allow members to speak on each of the questions contained in Appendix 1, as well as have an opportunity to make a general point. Can I have a seconder for this proposal? Councillor Bowden, thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. I will now call upon Councillor Bowden as Leader of the Council to present the report.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. We have 8 questions in Appendix 1, so a lot of the detail can be looked at and I can speak about the detail there. The background to all of this is explained within the paper. On the 16th of December, government announced that all 2-tier authorities in the country would be abolished and that they would be replaced by a system of unitary authorities. and that would also include some neighbouring small unitary authorities which are not financially sustainable. They would also be incorporated within the reorganisation. Further information has since emerged that the likely timetable that we are on, and there are two separate tracks to this, one fast track and one slower track, and as far as we are concerned, the relevant times and deadlines are as follows. By the 21st of March 2025, Jim McNaughton, the local government minister, has asked all authorities to write to him to give their initial thoughts on various matters, both to do with boundaries and to do with other matters such as the size of a council, how much money may be saved by doing all of this, and other matters as well. By the 28th of November 2025, all of the relevant authorities, including us, we are being asked to produce our final recommendations to the Secretary of State as to the way in which these matters will be changed. At some time in the following months, the Secretary of State will make a decision. I believe that some parts of that decision will need to be endorsed by means of primary legislation. My best understanding is that in May 2027, there will be an election to a shadow unitary authority, which will cover this area. The new unitary authority would then come into being on the vesting date, as it's called, on the 1st of April 2028, and that would be the date when Fenland District Council, Cambridgeshire County Council, and all the other two-tier authorities in our phase would cease to exist. So that's the order in which things are to be done, and the first thing that we need to do is to give an indication, an initial thought as to the way in which we want to see this operate. And I think going through each individual question will be the right way of doing it, other than to say, this, if we were designing the way in which local government reorganisation would take place, this isn't the way in which we would have done it, but we are subject to what the government says. And additionally, this is not the end of the process as far as we are concerned, far from it as far as council is concerned. This is only the very beginning. There will be member seminars on the matter, and also, before anything is put into central government for the 28th of November, we will most certainly have another council meeting, whether a special one or otherwise, in order to discuss exactly what it is that we put in. So there's a lot which will take place before the 28th of November. This is just the first initial stage. And I'll be more than happy then to speak briefly on each of the 8 questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor French. Would you like to exercise your right to speak now or reserve your right to do so at the conclusion of the debate?
Reserved.
As agreed, members are reminded to speak only once on each question, and then I will give members an opportunity to make general remarks before we conclude the debate. Please ensure that any specific recommendations you would like to make are stated as such so that they can be recorded in the minutes for further consideration. I'll now open the debate on question 1, which reads, should Fenland District Council initially express our concern and opposition to the manner and timing of this local government reform process, whilst recognising the right of central government to impose this and whilst also confirming our eagerness to participate fully in the process and to cooperate fully with other local councils so as to get the best possible outcomes for local residents. Councillor Bowden first, and then I'll open the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think it is not improper for us as a council to express our concern about the way in which this has been done and how quickly it is being done. And it's being done so quickly that we will not end up with the best possible outcome. Of that I am quite certain, not merely locally, but across the country as a whole. Nevertheless, it is government which is in charge. Government can and probably will end up imposing what it wants on this, and we have to recognise that they have the democratic right to do that. We also have a democratic right to express our concern about the situation, about the way in which this process has been started and is meant to continue. And I have to say that local government reorganisation is long, long overdue, but this really is not the right way of doing it. And if you compare it with the way in which local government reorganisation last took place systematically on the 1st of April 1974 as a result of the Local Government Act 1972, and all of the work which went into the process before that Local Government Act, the contrast is really stark. Nevertheless, we are where we are, and whilst I think it is quite appropriate for us to say that we're not happy with what government has done and how it's doing it, it's also vitally important that we express our willingness to cooperate and to go along with the processes they've set up. Because if we don't, the result is really simple. We'll have absolutely no voice, no say at all in what happens to us. Now, it may well be that we come up with a solution, all of the local authorities in Cambridgeshire and Peter may come up with the same solution, and government will still ignore that and do what it wishes. So by participating, we don't guarantee that we get a voice. By not participating, we do guarantee that we don't get a voice. So that's why it's appropriate for us to make it quite clear to government, however unhappy we are about how they've done this, that we will participate and we'll try to be as constructive as possible in getting the best possible outcome we can for Fenland. And that's what question 1 is about. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would anybody like to make any remarks about question 1? Councillor Tierney. Excuse me, Councillor, continue your microphone.
Of course, the leader is always nice to people, and I think that's a good trait, but I would much rather be a bit tougher. Confirming our eagerness, I don't want to confirm our eagerness. We're not eager. All right, we'll have to do this because we need to if we're forced to. But I don't want it to seem like we in any way support this, because let's make no bones about it. This is a terrible thing to be doing to this area, because this is going to create a huge authority, more remote from the people, far fewer councillors to help people, far more work on individual councillors, far less actual ability to change what the giant council will do for local people, taking away all of the special things that we do, like free parking, for instance, and council tax freezes. That's all going to go out the window. That won't exist in a new council, I don't think, nor will many other things. I suspect our residents are going to rue the day that this happened, and I would like to express that in every piece of literature we put to government, even though we accept we have to work with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on question 1? Councillor Hoy.
Yeah, just to reiterate the same. I don't think we should use the word eagerness. I don't think we should be eager to do this and eager to engage. I think this is a terrible thing. I think we're going to end up in a very terrible situation, particularly if we're going with Peterborough. We know where is close to Peterborough, Wisbech, Whittlesea. If Wisbech and Whittlesea would like Peterborough's rough sleepers, Peterborough's problems with drug and alcohol, that is very much what I see will happen, because we have cheaper house prices than Peterborough. So I can very much see a new unitary authority doing that. You know, perhaps if we are in charge, you know, we might not do that, but again, we're only going to make up a small portion of that, even if we are. So I think this is an absolutely terrible thing to happen. We're going to lose a lot of good people. You know, I think this council works really well. I think the officers we've got here do exceptionally well, and we're going to lose some of those potentially in a reform and reorganisation. I just think it's really, really sad. So I don't think we should be saying we're eager to do it. I think we should say we've accepted it, because we have to accept it, I guess, but I don't think we should be saying we're eager.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on question 1? Councillor Nawaz.
Thank you, Chair. There are good things about this and bad things about this. The good thing is, such as devolution of the health services, social services, and so on, but I do wonder how far they are really devolved. Most of the things seem to be going in the opposite direction, evolving, whereby we are losing the local touch. At a district level, I mean, I know every street of my ward, a lot of the people in those wards, and a lot of the people, I know what their issues and concerns are. Now, if we go down this road, 500,000 to 1 million, I know that they've shown some flexibility, but, you know, an assembly of, say, 100 members and representing possibly 1 million people is in no ways that can be categorized as devolution. So that is my principal concern. As for the makeup of the subsequent unity authority, it is being floated that possibly Peterborough and Huntingdonshire will combine with Fenland. I see differences, and the chatter on the street is the identity of Fenland as compared to that of Peterborough, the sort of urban economy and the rural economy, the kind of issues and concerns. I think Councillor Hoy has alluded to some of those. And I also share Councillor Bowden's concern that given the rushed planning and implementation of this, we're not going to be able to reflect and to think carefully of the possible consequences, and we're not going to end up with the best possible solution either. So these are my reservations. However, as Councillor Bowden has said, we will fully cooperate, and we will. I do support that we do fully participate in order that Voice of Fenland is heard robustly and effectively. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak on question 1? Okay, thank you. Question 2. Does full council see any exceptional circumstances to justify the splitting of any existing district council area in Cambridgeshire between 2 or more new unitary authorities? Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. When government set this process up, they said that they didn't want any existing district council to be split between 2 or more different unitary authorities. And the reason they gave, which is a perfectly valid one, is that, to use the terminology, the disaggregation of the council would be really complicated. When you split a council into 2 or even 3 pieces, then all of the assets, the liabilities, the contracts, everything needs to be split between those 3 authorities. And it's a really complicated process, and it takes a very long time indeed. When Northamptonshire had its forced local government reorganisation and was split into 2 unitaries, it took the best part of 3 years before they managed to sort out who actually owned what and who had liability for what in the new system, just because it is so complicated. So government has said they'd much rather that we use as the building blocks for the new unitary authorities the existing district councils on their existing boundaries. But they have said that if there were exceptional circumstances, they would be willing to consider splitting a district council. What this question is to ask if we see that there are any such circumstances. And whilst I can well imagine that we could argue about what should and should not be included in certain areas, nibbling around the edges, given the complication of this, given the speed with which it's got to be done, and given that this is happening over 21 county council areas, 20 apart from our own, given all of that, I just don't see the justification in us looking to, say, put Chatteris into one local authority and have the rest of our area in another local authority. I just don't see the point in doing so. I don't see any overriding reason to do so, and I see the unity of Fenland as being appropriate, as is the case, I believe, with the other local authorities as well. And we have a situation where Cambridge City is entirely surrounded by South Cambridgeshire District Council, and it makes very little sense indeed to do anything which does other than just combine those 2 authorities. So looking at the alternatives we've got in front of us, much though I enjoy looking at boundaries and considering various possible changes there may be to boundaries, in this process it would just cause unnecessary additional burden as part of the process of change, and it wouldn't actually achieve very much at all at the end of the day. So that's the reason for this question, and I believe the answer to this question, Chairman, should be no.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on question 2? Councillor Miscandlin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I totally agree with what Councillor Bowden said. Anything splitting up an area into 2, 3 other areas will be totally detrimental to the incoming authority. As he's quite eloquently said, North Hampshire or Northamptonshire had 3 years of difficult negotiations to try and get it sorted. We don't want that, not for the people of Fenland and not for the officers concerned. So I agree with Councillor Bowden. The answer to this should be no.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak on question 2? Okay, we'll move on to question 3. Does full council oppose, in principle, the creation of a single new unitary authority covering the whole of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area on the grounds that this would be too large an area for residents to consider such a unitary authority to be local? Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If one reads the information which has been put out by central government, the idea that you would have that our local authority, our local unitary authority, would cover the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough would be consistent with what they have written. There are some difficulties about the fact that we have already a combined authority which has the same boundaries, but even those combined authority boundaries aren't necessarily sacrosanct, and government can change the rules at any time that it wishes. But arithmetically, the idea that we would have one single authority covering the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough would be consistent with what government has so far put out, so far as local government reform is concerned. And I believe that that would be a desperately bad situation for us to be in. To be in a unitary authority of the size of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, with 2 major cities acting as polar opposites within that unitary authority, with a population of over 900,000, the idea of there being anything local about that form of local government is absolutely for the birds, in my opinion. And when you consider the amount of representation that Fenland would have in such an authority, we'd be very lucky indeed to get 10 councillors out of 100 in that particular arrangement. So I think that it is important that we send a message to government, just in case they had any idea that bigger is better. And to be honest, Chairman, I sometimes think they'd really like, as far as local government is concerned, to have the whole of England as the local government area, and they control it centrally from Whitehall. Sometimes I think that's their feeling. And if you do it on a purely arithmetic basis, yes, the larger you are, the greater efficiencies you can potentially manage to force through economies of scale. But there has to be a balance between that and local representation. And the idea that our local council would cover the whole of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is, I think, one that we would like to indicate to the Secretary of State does not find favour here in Fenland. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on question 3? Councillor Count and then Councillor Hay, please. Oh, and yeah.
Very quickly, short and sweet, apart from supporting Councillor Bowden's comments that he's already made, I believe that this falls short of the government's intentions in the fact that you cannot have a combined authority of one. So in reporting up to the Mayor, unless they intend the Mayor to have additional areas outside this area, which seem to be an impossibility, you cannot have a combined authority of one with one Mayor. You need at least 2 to have a combined authority. So I believe it's outside the guidance.
Thank you. Councillor Hay and then Councillor Davis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I fully agree with Councillor Bowden's words earlier. I think to have one unitary authority for the whole area, we're talking about a population in excess of 900,000, I believe. It's just too unwieldy. And with Cambridge at one end and Peterborough at the other, as Councillor Bowden said, we would never get anything done for the rural areas. And that would be my major worry. As it is, I'm worried even with 500,000, we're going to get very little off the table.
Thank you. Councillor Davis?
Yes, I support the statements made by everyone that's spoken before me. My major concern would be it's the villages, because I fear that the market towns may get some grace from a new unitary trust. From one unitary trust, I think the villages would lose out. I think 2 might just about give us a little bit more chance. So I really do agree with what everyone said.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously, I just don't know what this one-trick pony party is up to. I really don't. We're a rural area. We know the rural ways of life. We know that system inside out. To put us with somebody like Peterborough and Cambridgeshire will be just an absolute disaster for us that I can see. To me, it just seems as if they're trying to pile everything into one and get rid of their own financial, poorly run councils and put it in with all the others to make themselves look better. But for me, Fenland is a rural area. We know the rural ways of life. We don't know a lot about city lives, no more than city lives know about us. So to me, it's a complete and utter no-no to have two big cities in our system.
Thank you. Councillor Marks, please. Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on this question? No. Okay, we'll move on to question 4. Does full council oppose, in principle, the creation of a single new unitary authority covering the whole of the area of the current Cambridgeshire County Council, on the grounds that this would be too large an area for residents to consider such a unitary authority to be local? Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Again, mathematically, we would be satisfying much of what government is asking for by having 2 unitary authorities in the area, one for Peterborough and one for the existing boundaries of Cambridgeshire. However, one of the stated objectives of the changes which are taking place is to ensure that smaller unitaries which are having difficulty in being financially sustainable are absorbed into larger areas and larger unitary authorities. So this proposal wouldn't actually satisfy that, that objective. Nevertheless, the county council network had at one point very much advocated the way to achieve unitarisation was just abolish all the districts and then the counties could be the new unitary authorities. And I think the experience that we have had here in Fenland of what it is like to be ruled by councillors who are in Cambridge City, who make decisions which overwhelmingly benefit Cambridge City and do not benefit us here. Just look at what's happened with the roads, with highways, with pavements and so on. The idea that the Cambridge and Cambridge surrounding area, which is a very much a growth area, which government is growing, that would be the focus of a new authority and we would be right at the edge of it. That idea, I think, would be disastrous for the people of Fenland. And that's why my suggestion is that we should make it quite clear to the Secretary of State that if he had any idea of going along with the county council network idea of just abolishing the districts and making the county councils unitaries, that certainly doesn't apply or shouldn't apply here in Cambridgeshire. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on question 4? Councillor Count, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Earlier on, Councillor Hacknell has talked about the identity of an area, and it's certainly true that the identity of Cambridgeshire is not coherent at all. I've been fortunate enough to be the leader at Cambridgeshire County Council for a number of years and a group leader subsequent. And the difference between outcomes, the difference between health outcomes, longevity, the difference between affluence, the difference between the identity of the north and the south primarily rather than east and west of that county is huge. And the difficulties of trying to get coherent thought out during the period of time that I've been there has been very, very difficult. Now, when I was a leader, I really understood the differences that were there and tried to deal with them in the best way possible, and so did the group that supported me. But I now found that for the last few years, what we've got, and this would continue if we had a unitary led out of Cambridge, is that there's a simple misunderstanding about these differences, and you almost regard it as, what on earth is that chap from Fenland bleating on about again? Because surely we look after them wherever they live. It is that lack of identity that we're going to lose the larger we become. And so I really urge that we put it in the strongest possible terms that a single Cambridgeshire unitary will not work for us here in Fenland. It might work for some of the areas down the south, but it doesn't work for us up here. I'm so sad to say I didn't get up for question number 1 because it's already been said. I'm sad to see the direction we're going, but if there's one kernel of good news that will come out of this if we don't get ruled by Cambridge City anymore, which has been happening, because that has not served us well up here. It's not served us, it's not even been recognised, the differences, and I'm sad to say that I've been unable to do anything about that for the last 4 years, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Nawaz, please.
Thank you. Going back to my first contribution, question one, this is, if you like, losing localism times 7. There are 7 constituent authorities, all with their own particular characteristics, their own needs, be that health, education, employment, or transport. As we know, we have areas of multiple deprivation, particularly, say, in north of Wisbech, or in the middle of sort of mid-Fenland, and these metrics are quite different. Now, all this will be drowned in one massive organisation, which will probably be ruled by whichever party has the majority, which may not necessarily represent the needs and concerns of a particular part of Fenland, let alone Cambridgeshire. So, we might as well, if it is going to be as remote as this, we might as well be ruled directly from Westminster, rather than by a massive organisation like this. It is very sad for me to see the concept of localism being drowned out by an authoritarian approach to this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak on this question? Okay, we'll move on to question 5. Does full council accept that, given the need to provide upper and lower tier responsibilities in a financially sustainable manner, the new unitary authority, which includes Fenland, would need to have a population of at least the government-stated 500,000 lower limit, if not higher? Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And I'm going to have some difficulty on this one, trying to justify why we should have a local, so-called local authority with a population of 500,000 or more, even though that's what the government's stated guidelines are, that they want to see these unitaries to be between 500,000 and 1 million in population. They have said informally to some people that they'd be willing to have a smaller figure, but only in special circumstances. Now, obviously I will have some difficulty in justifying this because I know perfectly well from my discussions with various members of this council, Chairman, that there are those members of this council, far from wanting to move in the direction that we are going to be forced to move in, they would rather go backwards towards what the situation was before the 1st of April 1974, and they'd like to see the reintroduction of the urban district councils, the rural district councils, and our one municipal borough. And they would actually be more comfortable in going in that direction rather than going in the direction of a larger authority. And I've got a great deal of sympathy for that thought, but that's not the way in which government is going to allow us to go. So we have to accept that we are going to go into a unitary authority. And one of the problems with a unitary authority, which some members here are very well aware of, because some members here are also members of the county council, is that there are some very high spending and high cost responsibilities that the county council has got that will need to come into the new unitary authority. And I'm thinking particularly here of adults' social care, of children's social care, and of SEND responsibilities, special educational needs and disabilities. And some of these costs are, many of these costs are demand-led, so they can't be predicted. You can't control the cost, you just have to absorb the costs, absorb the liabilities. And you need to have a large authority with a large council tax base and a large financial base to be able to do that in a sustainable way. Just as an example, and remember, our budget, what we're talking about, 10, 11, 12 million pounds, depends on which way you measure it, 12 million. If you look at, for example, just looking after one child for social care, where that child has a very high level of need, you can be talking in a figure, an annual figure of well over £1 million a year. You can be talking, and we have talked about in Cambridgeshire, over £30,000 a week for the needs of that child. And these requirements can suddenly land on a local authority because a family moves from one place to another place. And suddenly the new authority finds that it's got to find that, meet that liability immediately. And you need to have a financial resilience to be able to do that. And financial resilience can only be met in one of two ways. The first is to have very rich areas, which can have financial resilience. And the second is to have larger areas to spread the load out. And that's what this 500,000 figure represents as far as we are concerned. It is the government's guideline as to what they want, and it's actually appropriate for us, because if we are to be in a unitary authority, then we will need to have that degree of size to be able to absorb the massive pressures which there will be for adults, children and SEND. And when we get the budget for that new unitary authority, we will find that 70, 75, 80% of the budget will be taken up just on those areas. I'm not even including things like highways, let alone anything that this council does at the moment. But those three areas in particular are massively expensive areas which a new unitary authority will have to take responsibility for. And in order to do so in a sustainable way, we will need the size to be able to absorb the pressures which there will be. So that is the reason why I am suggesting that we recognise that the government's minimum limit of 500,000 is appropriate for Fenland. We are not a rich area, and we're not surrounded by any rich areas either. So it's not as though we can somehow manage to have a smaller number and still be financially sustainable. That's the reason for this question, and that's why I suggest the answer to this question is yes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would anybody like to speak on this one? Councillor Tierney, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I feel that I ought to speak because of the points just raised by the leader. People, I think, don't realise that regardless of who is in charge of county council, things like highways get crowded out by the huge costs of adult and children's social care. And you can change the priorities, and I know different parties, including my party, would do things slightly differently, but the point is that challenge is always there. And if people think they're frustrated now with the state of the roads, and people absolutely are, everything is going to be crowded out by this new authority in the future. When this new authority is created, those massive costs over a wide area are going to crowd out everything. And that will be things that currently are nothing to do with that council because it doesn't exist. So things like bin collections, things like street lights, all the things that people take, things like parks, cutting of grass, festivals to some extent, all sorts of things that are done now by this council. In a new council that takes on those responsibilities are going to have this same problem that highways have now, being crowded out by these vastly high costs. And the governments never want to address this. They never want to come in and give additional money or look at presenting things differently. They just forget about it almost. But this is going to become a problem for this gigantic new council that I think, again, I think people are just going to look back on these days as days they fondly remember, because they're going to get really, really tough. And yes, I agree. 500,000 is the minimum for this to work, even though I hate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on this question? Okay. Question 6. Does full council accept that the government's specific and national priority growth agenda for the south of the county could potentially justify Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire district councils with a population of around 313,000, arguing that exceptional circumstances exist which may justify those areas, with or without the area of East Cambridgeshire District Council, forming a unitary authority with a population of fewer than 500,000. Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I've just explained why 500,000 is a minimum figure that we need, but one of the exceptions is where you have a large amount of wealth or a large amount of growth. And both in Cambridge City and especially in South Cambridgeshire as well, there is a large amount of wealth and there is going to be a very large amount of growth. You don't merely have the development taking place there currently, but government is clearly indicating that they're expecting massively more development to take place there, not merely in terms of housing, but also in terms of infrastructure and in terms of jobs and high-tech development as well. So, let's just look at our own position of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. The whole area has a population of just over 900,000. If government were to say, you have to have a minimum of 500,000, well, it doesn't take a mathematician to see that 2 into 1 won't go there. You won't be able to get 2 unitary authorities with a population of over 500,000 on the footprint of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So it's actually in our interest, as well as, I would say, in the interests of Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, that we recognise that they are a special case. They're an area of the highest growth that there's going to be in the country, as far as government is concerned. They already are a centre of substantial growth and of substantial wealth. And if there are to be such things as exceptional circumstances justifying an authority which has a population of fewer than 500,000, I can't imagine a more appropriate place than Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire. And the fortunate corollary of that is, of course, that would then leave the rest of the area, with or without East Cambridgeshire, to be able to form a unitary authority of sufficient size. Now, I'm not suggesting that we support Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire joining together just for that purpose, but it is something that we ought to bear in mind. There's a lot of discussions have taken place between chief executives and leaders of councils over the course of the last 2 or 3 months about local government reorganisation, and those discussions have quite correctly been very much on Chatham House rules, and we are not meant to say what anyone else says. So I'm not going to make comments about what other local authority leaders are saying or other local authority chief executives are saying, but what I would say is that if we do say that Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire are a special case for the economic reasons that I mentioned, then that will actually help us, I believe, in Fenland to end up with an authority of an appropriate size. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would anybody like to speak on question 6? Councillor Count, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think that Councillor Bowden, the leader, articulated very well the numbers surrounding the case that this might be a special case. And I'd go so further, and we was talking earlier on about identity. When you look at Cambridge City, which is the centre of the donut of South Cambridgeshire, it's literally surrounded on all 4 sides. There's no 4 sides in a donut, but I think you understand what I mean. It's completely encircled it. Anybody that lives in South Cambridgeshire looks to Cambridge City as their city. There is no doubt about that. They don't look in 2 different directions that some of us do. The actual outcomes for them, the outcome of their health, their actual productivity, everything matches up very, very nicely. So there is a special case for what is already established as the GCP area, with or without East Cambs, who also look towards Cambridge more than they do in any other direction, although they do to some extent look to Newmarket. There is no doubt that in the whole country you will probably not find a better example of somewhere where that you could go under 500,000 and still maintain a reasonable authority. Councillor Bowden mentioned earlier on there are 2 ways that you can handle the impact of having somebody with a high social care need. One is to have a larger authority, and one would be to have sufficient finances. Now, I don't do the bookwork for Cambridge City, but I would suggest anybody that can afford £50 million to do up their Guildhall must have a certain amount of resources at their disposal. Anybody that can charge a person over £30 to park in their car park for a few hours in a day must have sufficient resources to wear that sort of thing. And the government is very, very keen to put another 150,000 homes on top of existing plans in that area. So it doesn't need much of an imagination to know that it will be at that 500,000 mark very, very quickly. So yes, I strongly support this argument that there are cases around the country, and we've got a prime one where it may be possible to go under that 500,000 number by a significant degree. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on this question? No? In which case we'll move to question number 7. Does full council favour an initial unitary council size of around 100 members, subject to reduction at the end of the first term of office, with wards or divisions formed from the existing county council divisions in Cambridgeshire and the existing city council wards in Peterborough? Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Let me first of all explain what happens when you have local government reorganisation and you have a lot of districts which then form part of a new unitary. What happens is basically chaos. It is ever so complicated. It is really difficult to keep control of what's going on, and especially in that first term of office, there's an awful lot of learning to take place. There's an awful lot of reorganisation and of recalibration to take place in order to try to create a local authority which effectively works. As a result of that, when this type of reorganisation takes place, it is usual to start off with a very large number of councillors to meet the amount of work which is required in the new authority. Then what is usual, and I'm going to give two examples, two current examples, then during the first term of office, the Local Government Boundary Commission will look at the new unitary authority and will come up with new ward boundaries and a smaller number of councillors to match the longer term requirements of that unitary authority. I'll give two examples of this, both of which have happened and are happening. Well, this year is going to be the year when they will have their smaller councils. When Buckinghamshire was made into a unitary authority, it had, and still does have, 147 councillors on its council. And now it's had 4 or 5 years of existence. The Local Government Boundary Commission has determined that in the elections taking place this May, that 147 is going to be reduced to 97, which is a more appropriate number for the amount of work which is required. Similarly, Durham Unitary Authority was created by abolishing all of the districts within Durham, and they started off with 126 councillors. And similarly, that authority is coming up for election this May, and the Local Government Boundary Commission has reduced the number of councillors from 126 to 98. So it's not unusual, in fact it's necessary to have a larger number to start off with, a larger number of councillors, in order to meet the really quite exceptional demands that there are of trying to knit together a new authority from what remains of the old areas, and you'll have members of staff who are coming from different authorities within the area and from outside as well. It is a very complicated process. So it's not inappropriate to start off in our area with a figure of around 100 councillors. It's not long, in the long term, it's not necessary to have as many as that. But remember, we're talking here about upper tier responsibilities as well as all the ones that we're used to. And I can tell you it takes an awful lot of effort to run children's services, to run adult services, and to oversee those effectively. And that's why you need a good number of councillors to do that in order to fulfil that function. Additionally, we're talking here about local authorities which are going to be much larger than our current district councils. And I dread to think how, if we have too few councillors, how they will possibly be able to cope with the casework that there will be, which will develop, because that casework isn't going to go away. Just because Fenland District Council stops existing doesn't mean to say that people within Fenland will stop asking for help, will stop needing help. That casework will still exist, and will have to be met by fewer councillors than we've got now. So we will have fewer councillors. We've got to be careful not to make it too few, and we've got to make sure that during the transition we have enough councillors to deal with the transition. Thank you, Chairman.
Would anybody like to speak on question 7? Councillor Count and then Councillor Nawaz.
Yes, thank you, Chair. At present, Chair, district and county and Peterborough, there are 330 councillors. That doesn't include parishes, etc. So, or towns. There's 330 councillors, South Cambs, Fenland, East Cambs, etc. So if we look at a limit of 100, roughly 100 per unitary, and we're looking at potentially at 2 unitaries, you're looking at 200 councillors, which is a reduction of 130. So overall, I think this is a good start. I think it does need to go further, and it will go further. But there's an element of the question in front of us that I totally agree with the concept of 100, but I do want to raise the difficulties with the actual divisions, basing on divisions and wards. When places like Buckinghamshire went from districts into a unitary and county into a unitary, they didn't actually have a new boundary commission look at all the individual sections. So the options then to maintain the actual level of degree of parity for you and your residents, X thousand residents per councillor, you are met with the simple choice of 1 councillor per division, 2 councillors per division, 3 councillors per division, or ward, whichever way you do it. And the same thing will apply here. However much we start off with, there is no capacity in the Boundary Commission to do the whole of the country and start saying, actually, that person's got 12,000 residents, that person's got 6. So it has to start off with either our ward or our county divisions and work forward with simple multiples from there. And I suggest that it says in here county divisions and wards in the cities. I suggest that it may be, when people look at the numbers, easier to look at this at wards and wards, because the latter sums, when you go from, say, 2 to 1, you won't be able to go to 1.5 to 1, but you might be able to do that in wards. So I think it's a question that we need to open up and think about a little bit more. But also, the government has set out proposals. The latest guidance, which just come out, which went on further from the original guidance, was they expect numbers to come in between 30 and 100. God help those that have picked 30 for 500,000 people and they say that they're looking after their residents, but that's where the government started. Now, if you hit the low, anywhere near the lower or the higher number, you have to give a full and detailed explanation. That's come out of the guidance, i.e. they're going to be a little bit reluctant. And I think putting forward the proposal of a transition arrangement is important if we're going to look at 100 at the start, but also for in terms of the public that I think Councillor Burden's already mentioned. There are things that the district do and the county do that are very different. If you expect to do that with a lower number, you're going to lose so much corporate knowledge that it's going to become very, very difficult. So on behalf of our residents, for a transition period, we should be at the higher number. So that would be about 200, which is 130 reduction on the actual existing amount of councillors at the moment. So I support this, but I would like Cabinet to consider that element of how it's going to be divided up later on, whether to select wards or divisions as part of their response. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nawaz, please.
Thank you. I agree entirely with the previous two speakers, absolutely. But additionally, I wonder if I may point out the differences between, say, Peterborough City Council and the more rural areas in Fenland, or rural areas in general. Now, currently, for example, the South Whittlesea Division spans over a distance of 13 miles because it is so spread out, whereas in Peterborough City Council, the Unity Authority, that may be less than 3 miles with the same number of residents. But on top of that, the number of councillors will have additional work to do. For example, the so-called devolution and the current reorganisation of health services, we're not entirely sure how that's going to look like. I know the government are in a mood to do away with the current NHS England model, take it into direct control, and how that would be delivered, presumably through the local councils and so on. So on top of the current duties, the councillors will be expected to deliver or have part in delivering, monitoring the health services, the social services, the education, and so on. For the same number of councillors to do additional amount of work would be something that needs to be taken into account, as well as the logistic issue of the areas that need to be covered. So, I mean, I would argue for possibly more than 100, but as it says here, around 100, I think that would be a good start. Possibly later on they could have two member, minimum 2 member or even 3 member divisions or wards, as is currently the case with equal size sort of wards in the current Peterborough City Council Unity Authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on this question? Right. Question number 8. Does full council agree, until there is a firmer idea as to the boundaries of any new unitary authorities and until the creation of the finance officer's financial model based on 2024-2025 budget data for all 7 principal authorities, that it would be premature to indicate to government the level of potential savings, if any, that this local government review process may produce? Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And one of the things which the Minister Jim McMahon has asked us to do for the 21st of March, is to give an indication about how much money we think we will manage to save by making these changes to local government. Now, the one thing which is certain is it's going to cost an awful lot to make the changes, but it is theoretically possible that there will be some reductions in costs in the longer term. They may not be quite as large as might be imagined, because the economies of scale really aren't going to work particularly well here in terms of the main areas of expense, which, as I've mentioned before, are children's social services, adult social services, and SEND provision. Because if we are talking about, in our case, 2 authorities with upper tier responsibilities, that is Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, being changed into 2 authorities with upper tier responsibility, which are the 2 unitary authorities, you don't get any savings of scale out of that. And if you look elsewhere in the country, you have places like Surrey and Essex, where they're talking about what may be currently single areas being split into 3 unitary authorities. So in fact, it's going to cost more than the current arrangements based purely on economies of scale. So I think it would be absolutely rash of us to go back to the Minister, as he's requesting, and say, we think we'll manage to save £20 million a year by instituting these changes, because there's absolutely no justification for saying that at all. Having said that, the local authority officers in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough are putting together a template of costs, looking to see what savings would be possible. And I suggest we wait until November before we say anything about that to the Secretary of State. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would anybody like to make any comments about question 8? Councillor Tierney, please, and then Councillor Christie.
Thank you. Yes. Anybody who thinks that any money is ever going to be saved through this must have lived in cloud cuckoo land for a long time. Anybody who's ever seen a local authority go through a massive change, move a premises, build a new premises, change all its structures, knows that it costs millions and millions and millions, and that is for a small organisation. Doing it to all the organisations at the same time and then trying to combine them into one giant new organisation is going to cost a vast amount of money, and we will not, any of us in our lifetimes, in my opinion, see any savings whatsoever. Quite the opposite. We are going to have costs going on forever. We're going to be paying for this for years and years and years. And anyone who's seen any local authority do a reorganisation like this knows it's true. I mean, and you just have to look at what happened when County Council moved to New Shire Hall and the problems that have gone on and on and on, and selling the old place and the new place not having the right things in place. Now, you can do some good things. You can make a few changes that make it better, but you can't imagine everything that's coming. And so whatever you do is never going to be enough, because you're going to be constantly watching the money. So there is no way anybody can sell this as a saving. Now, I know some officers in some authorities are going to come up with some budgets that make it look like there's going to be some savings. It's cloud cuckoo land. It's not going to happen. This is going to cost us all for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Christie, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. For me, I think this is the question and the statement that sort of underpins this whole exercise, really, this whole misconception that there'll be potential savings. I haven't answered spoken any other questions there, but we've already heard about the differences we've got across this county, and savings are delivered through synergies. I am struggling to see any synergies that we have across this county in there. In fact, I see the opposite. Actually, to make this work, you probably need another layer of management. I think it could actually end up potential costs to move to a unitary authority here as well, given as well the fact that it will cost not millions, tens of millions of pounds to make this happen. So yeah, I fully support that. We just are not in any position to put forward any potential cost savings here, and so I don't think actually it's going to potentially cost us to run this as unitary authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Count, please.
Yes, I completely endorse what Councillor Christie and Councillor Tierney have just said. I've seen some confidential figures on what costs of aggregation might cover in various areas, and they come up with all sorts of figures. But when you look at the cost of splitting things up and think how you're going to get that back, I honestly think that we're in trouble here. And whilst it might make sense for certain areas, I struggle in Cambridgeshire Now, we've got a simple set of questions here, and we're trying to feed back into Cabinet to give us answers. Primarily yes, no, and the yes, I think we should hold off from giving back any figures of what savings there might be. I also think we should write back a clear message. We don't believe that there are savings to be made here. We believe that Cambridgeshire as a whole is terribly, terribly underfunded. And to look at shuffling the chairs on the deck of the Titanic and think that will somehow save us, it won't. We should take this opportunity to point out the error of their ways and actually request them for more money. Now, the cost of disaggregation, X millions, I won't go into how much it's going to be, but it's a lot. It's in the tens, well over 10 million. But that has to be met from county council and district council existing budgets. The government isn't giving support for that. They're saying you should be able to recover that from the costs. Well, what if you can't? We're already terribly, terribly underfunded here in Cambridgeshire, and this is just going to make our situation worse. So I would happily ask that the Cabinet, as well as saying we can't give you indicative savings now, actually say, have a look at giving us some more so we can actually cope with this measure that's being forced upon us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on this question? Okay. We've concluded our remarks on the specific questions contained in Appendix 1. I will now allow any member a final opportunity to make any final general remarks, all of which will be forwarded to Cabinet for consideration at their meeting following this council. Would any members like to make any final remarks? Councillor Clark. Excuse me, Councillor, could you put your microphone on, please?
Is it working now?
This one is.
Lovely, yeah. I'd like to declare an interest. I get £6,000 paid expenses from this council, and this really affects me because I'm voting for, you know, losing my job. And there are other members that are on districts and county, as well as others in excess of £40,000. So I'm surprised nobody declared an interest when there's those sort of monies that we are talking about. I think we've already got a little bit of unitary because we have councillors on parish councils, Fenland councils, county councils, combined authority councils. So we've got one councillor making several decisions on varying councils. I think there's an understanding that it is going to happen, and we've got to sort of pick out the road that we take to get the best way we can. But I do think it's definitely going to happen. It's not as if we've got a choice and try and negotiate that we can negotiate a way out of it. And I do believe this would have happened under a Conservative government anyway, just exactly the same, although there might have been different scenarios. I do feel there's going to be an awful lot of work, and I'm sure Councillor Count will attest to how much work he put into the combined authority. It takes hours and hours and hours going here, there, everywhere. He spent hours working up plans for the combined authority. And I do have concerns, and I'm sure he will absolutely do our best. But our leader is on the parish council or town council at Whittlesea. He's here as the leader and finance. He's on the Cambs County Council. He's on the combined authority. He's an elected member on a London council, and I really hope he's able to find the time to give all of this enough attention to get the best course we can for Fenland. On page 4, we mention about staff. I think staff attrition, I think it was called, I think that is a real concern for this council, because in any reorganisation, you always tend to lose your best staff first. And I think for the next 3 years, that staff knowing that although they'll be stupid to whatever authority takes their place, it's going to be a real uncomfortable position for Fenland staff and on all the other authorities. And I think that's going to be very, very difficult to manage and to get the best out of them. Because in any reorganisation, you tend to lose the good staff first. And I hope that the Chief Executive is able to manage that and look after his staff. And there's another on page 5, council tax harmonisation, which that could benefit Fenland for a little while. I believe Fenland council tax is the highest out of the area, which is £254.78, compared to the lowest, which is East Cams at £142.14, which is over £100 difference. So if there is a tax harmonisation, Fenland could have a couple of years grace and, you know, perhaps won't be paying the amount of tax we do pay at the moment. And I notice that there's a BBC report that the draft response from 6 council leaders state that they were considering different unitary scenarios, but I think, if I read it correctly, they're waiting for a response from Fenland. So I don't know whether the cabinet meeting that follows this meeting is to be able to put their signature to that, or whether Fenland is going to run their own race and put their own response in. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't really leave that diatribe to kind of go unchallenged, really, because Councillor Clark mentions about the council tax being higher, but fails to mention that relates to Band D, of which in Fenland, as he well knows, we have very few of. So it's not really a fair comparison. He also fails to mention that when he was leader of the council, he raised council tax pretty much every year. So given that he now seems it to be so unnecessarily high, perhaps he's having regrets for the times he raised it. But the final thing I wanted to say was just there was another little barbed comment about councils being paid and the leader being on all these different authorities. Councillor Clark was also on a number of authorities, but the one he wasn't on, which was March Town Council, which is an unpaid council. Make of that what you will.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to make any final remarks? In which case, Councillor French, would you like to exercise your reserved right to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I think enough has been said.
Thank you. Councillor Bowden, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. This was a very difficult debate to plan, because in most cases we have a fairly simple yes or no decision to make on a particular proposal. In this case, we are almost stepping into the unknown, so it makes it really difficult, even on this initial basis, as we're being asked for by government, to make a decision, which is why this has been set up. Cabinet is the organisation under our constitution which has the responsibility for deciding upon how a response will be made, but it's entirely appropriate that all members of the council have had an opportunity to have their say, so that that can be taken into account by Cabinet when they make their decision in the next few minutes. And going through the comments, some of the comments which have been made, I think there are elements within the debate that we've had which will need to be reflected in what we finally end up deciding goes to the Secretary of State. And I agree, the word eagerness to describe our willingness to participate fully in this process is definitely inappropriate. Whilst we may be willing, we are certainly not eager, and I think it was quite correct for that to be pointed out. When we look at the size of a council and how many councillors there will need to be, at least initially, I think the comments made by Councillor Count are particularly relevant, especially in terms of the corporate knowledge which exists, and losing a significant amount of the knowledge that councillors have got from their previous councils when going to the new council given the very significant reductions in numbers that there will be, I think that is something which does need to be borne very much in mind. And then when we talk about the savings that we're being asked to estimate, which I think we all agree we're not going to fall into that trap, but I fear that some of the comments which have been made by members today are entirely correct, and that many of these savings will turn out to be either illusory or far less than the costs which are associated with the savings. And I think that it is probably, given the comments which have been made today by various members, it's not inappropriate for us to reflect that as well in the response that we make, that we are concerned that that is a direction which this process may end up with. As for Councillor Clark's comments, I think he was entirely correct to point out the effect that this will have on staff, not merely in Fenland, not merely in the local authorities in Cambridgeshire, but in the dozens of authorities, whether they be county councils, district councils, or neighbouring small unitaries, the dozens of councils which will be involved in this process over the course of the next 3 years. And, Chairman, you really have to feel for our staff that their livelihoods and their futures are up in the air unexpectedly as a result of this whole process. So that definitely is something that we have to be very well aware of. And I know, Councillor Clark, that Paul Mead, as Head of Paid Service, is more than well aware of this particular issue and is taking appropriate steps to deal with that. On council tax harmonisation, I don't want to say too much about this, partly because I think there's a limit to how long you want me to talk about statutory instruments and some of the legal details behind all of this. But there is a real danger here. Now, we have a very low council tax base. So whilst our council tax band D is a high figure, the amount of council tax that we raise is not high at all in comparison with some of our neighbouring authorities. The problem is that the council tax harmonisation is a harmonisation not of amounts of council tax paid, but harmonisation of the amounts paid for different bands. And if we start out in a situation where our band D is significantly higher than others because of our low council tax base, then it could take years, in some cases it's taken many years in the past to achieve that final harmonisation. In Suffolk, for example, when there were changes which took place, it took 7 years before all parts of a new local authority created there were at the same level of council tax. And I don't want us to be in a situation where Fenland residents in the new unitary authority are paying more in whatever band they are than those residents who come from other parts of that unitary authority. So council tax harmonisation isn't necessarily the good and simple and straightforward and quick thing that might be imagined. It could be drawn out, and it could be highly detrimental to the interests of Fenland residents as opposed to residents elsewhere in the area. And I can, of course, give complete assurance to Councillor Clark that I'm fully able to take the amount of time which is necessary to deal with this. I have to say, unfortunately, it does mean, necessarily has meant, that I've had to spend more time on this than I would have done on other issues. But even with the pressures that we've got on local government reorganisation, we've still been able to push through, at a very early stage, our Fenland Inspire project to make sure that when Fenland District Council ceases to exist, we leave a legacy in terms of some of the infrastructure that we've got, which will mean that at least the Fenland residents will be, to a great extent, safeguarded when the new unitary authority takes place, and we will continue to have the services and the facilities which Fenland residents will expect and require. So I think it's been a really helpful debate, Chairman, and thank you for your chairing it as well. And I hope and expect that the Cabinet will reflect the comments which have been made. Thank you.
Thank you. The recommendation is on page 4 of the agenda pack and is for full council to consider the questions raised at Appendix 1 and make such recommendations to Cabinet as it seems fit for inclusion in the initial response to government. Members have had an opportunity to fully debate the content of the report and to provide their responses to the questions in Appendix 1. It is proposed that the draft minutes of the debate are shared with Cabinet for their consideration in determining Fenland District Council's initial response to government. Is that agreed? Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this afternoon's meeting. I would like to thank you for your attendance, and may I remind you that the next meeting of full council will be the annual meeting and is due to take place on Monday the 19th of May at 4 p.m. The Cabinet meeting is starting very shortly. Therefore, if members are leaving the room, please can you do so quickly. Thank you.